The storm rolled over the prairie like a wounded beast, tearing through the night with wind and lightning. Out on the edge of the land, where only the lonely dared to live, stood a small ranch house, its lantern light flickering against the dark. Inside, Samuel Briggs and a man hardened by loss and silence sat by the fire nursing a cup of black coffee and the ghosts that never stopped whispering. He thought he'd buried the past long ago, but when a faint knock echoed at his door, soft, desperate, and half-drowned by rain, everything changed. He opened it to find a woman, drenched and trembling, blood staining her dress, and when she looked up and whispered, "It hurts," the rancher froze. What he did next would alter both their fates forever. The wind screamed across the plains, shaking the windows of Samuel Briggs's small ranch house. Rain hammered the roof, each drop sounding like a warning. He sat in his chair near the fire, staring into the flames, his mind drifting between the past and the emptiness that filled his days. The storm didn't bother him anymore. He'd lived through worse. What haunted him wasn't the thunder outside, but the silence inside his chest. A man alone too long forgets what it feels like to be needed. Then came the knock. 3 uneven, almost timid knocks against the wooden door, barely audible over the rain. Samuel's brow furrowed. No one should have been out there, and not this late, not in weather like this. He stood slowly, reaching for the rifle leaning against the wall. Another knock followed, weaker this time, as if whoever was out there was running out of strength. He unlatched the door and pulled it open. The wind roared in, blowing rain and cold straight into his face. Standing in the doorway was a woman, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her dress torn and muddied. She looked half-conscious, her arms wrapped around her middle where dark blood stained the fabric. Her lips trembled as she met his eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It hurts." Samuel froze. For a heartbeat, he just stood there, the storm howling behind her, the firelight flickering between them. She swayed on her feet, and before she could fall, he set the rifle aside and caught her, his strong hands steadying her trembling body. She was cold, colder than anyone should ever be. "Easy now," he muttered, pulling her inside and shutting the door against the storm. "You're safe here." He carried her to the couch by the fire, her wet clothes soaking through his shirt. Laying her down gently, he grabbed a towel and threw another log on the fire. The dog at his feet whined, circling nervously. Samuel knelt beside her, assessing the wound. The blood came from her side. Not deep enough to kill quickly, but bad enough to drain her strength if left untended. "Who did this?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Her eyes were glassy, lost between pain and exhaustion. He tore a strip from an old flannel shirt and pressed it against the wound. She gasped and gripped his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "It's all right," he said softly. "It'll sting, but you'll live." She let out a weak sob, half from pain, half from relief. He worked quickly, cleaning and wrapping the wound as thunder shook the walls. When it was done, she looked up at him, her lashes heavy with tears. "I saw your light," she murmured. "Didn't know where else to go." Samuel brushed damp hair from her face. "You did right." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small house, the fire burned warm and steady. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Samuel sat back, watching her breathe. He didn't know who she was or what danger she carried, but something about her presence felt like a door opening in his heart, one he thought had closed forever. The storm lasted through the night, hammering the land with rain and lightning until the plains looked like a sea of mud and wind. Samuel didn't sleep. He sat in his chair beside the couch, the rifle resting across his knees, his eyes shifting between the fire and the woman lying under the blanket. Every so often she'd stir, mumbling something in her sleep, fragments of names, half-formed words, fear bleeding through her dreams. Each time, Samuel would whisper quietly, "You're safe now," even if he wasn't sure it was true. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed in gray light and silence. The air smelled of wet earth and ash. Samuel stood and stretched the stiffness from his back, then crouched beside her. Her face looked softer in the light, pale, tired, but alive. The blood had stopped seeping through the bandage and her breathing was steady. He let out a slow breath, one he didn't know he'd been holding all night. When she opened her eyes, they met his, wide, wary, but clear. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the fire's faint crackle. Finally, her voice broke the quiet. "You saved me." Samuel shrugged slightly, reaching for his coffee cup. "Just did what needed doing." She tried to sit up and winced. He set the cup down and moved to help, adjusting the pillow behind her. "Careful," he said. "You'll tear it open again." "Thank you," she murmured, looking around the small cabin, the rough-hewn walls, the table stacked with tools, the faded photograph of a woman and child on the mantel. "You live out here alone?" He hesitated before answering. "Yeah, been that way a while." Her gaze lingered on the photo. "Your family?" Samuel followed her eyes but didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough for her to understand. She looked down at her hands, tracing the blanket with her fingers. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He cleared his throat and stood, busying himself with the coffee pot. "Don't be. It's old history." She watched him quietly as he poured her a cup and handed it over. Her hands trembled as she took it, sipping carefully. "My name's Clara," she said after a moment. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." "I figured as much," Samuel replied, taking a sip of his own. "You don't end up shot in the middle of a storm without a reason." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to explain, but fear flickered in her eyes. "There were men," she said finally. "3 of them. They came after me when I left town. I thought I'd lost them in the hills, but—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "One of them fired," Samuel set his cup down slowly. "You think they'll come looking?" She nodded weakly. "If they think I'm still alive." He crossed his arms, glancing toward the window. The land outside was still and wet, but danger had a way of finding its road. "Then we'll be ready," he said simply. Clara looked up at him, this quiet, rugged man with eyes that carried years of hurt. And something inside her shifted. For the first time since the gunfire, she felt safe. Samuel turned back to the fire, his jaw tightening as he stared into the flames. He didn't know what kind of trouble she'd brought, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let her face it alone. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, letting in the first streaks of morning sun. Inside, the cabin no longer felt so empty.